Queen Victoria ruled an empire that stretched across continents. Yet behind the portraits, palaces, and proclamations was a mother whose private world was far more fragile than the crown she wore. Her marriage to Prince Albert produced 9 children, each born into privilege but bound to destinies shaped by duty, diplomacy, and the heavy weight of monarchy. Their lives would ripple across Europe, redefining royal houses, igniting scandals, and in some cases, helping set the stage for the very conflicts that would tear the continent apart. Victoria's personal letters reveal a woman torn between fierce maternal love and a temperament often marked by anxiety, melancholy, and strict expectations. The very empire she presided over demanded alliances through marriage, and her children became instruments of statecraft as much as individuals seeking their own paths. Some adapted to that burden with grace. Others rebelled, suffered, or vanished quietly beneath the machinery of royal obligation. Beneath the grandeur was a family marked by early deaths, political tension, sibling rivalries, and the relentless pressure to uphold the prestige of the British crown. From the heir who nearly died as a child and later struggled under the shadow of his parents' disapproval, to the daughter who became the mother of emperors, to the sons whose scandals threatened the monarchy's stability, Victoria's 9 children lived lives that were anything but fairy tales. Their marriages forged alliances that shaped modern Europe. Their quarrels exposed the fractures hidden beneath royal protocol. And their descendants would sit on the thrones of Germany, Russia, Norway, Sweden, Spain, and the United Kingdom itself. This is the story of Queen Victoria and the 9 children who carried her legacy into every corner of a rapidly changing world. Their paths reveal the true human cost of monarchy. The sacrifices demanded, the emotions suppressed, and the futures decided long before they took their first breath. In this countdown, we will move from number 9 to number 1, tracing the lives that defined a dynasty and helped shape the world we know today. Number 9. Prince Leopold, Duke of Albany. Number 9 is Prince Leopold, the youngest son of Queen Victoria, born in 1853. From the moment he entered the world, it was clear that his life would be shaped not by the privileges of royalty alone, but by the limitations of a body that struggled against him. Leopold suffered from hemophilia, a genetic condition that made even the smallest injury potentially fatal. At a time when medicine could offer little protection, his childhood was marked by caution, supervision, and the constant worry of a mother already inclined to fear for her children. Victoria adored him, but her protectiveness often bordered on suffocating. She saw in him a gentleness inherited from Prince Albert, and she clung to him with an intensity that revealed her own emotional fragility. Leopold grew into a young man of striking intellect and curiosity. While his brothers charged into military careers, Leopold pursued scholarship and political thought. He attended Oxford, excelled in the arts, and surrounded himself with writers, thinkers, and reformers. But his illness stood as a barrier between him and the independence he longed for. Travel required meticulous planning. Exercise carried risks. Even small tasks became acts of quiet courage. Despite this, he resisted his mother's attempts to confine him, insisting on carving a life defined by agency rather than fear. His relationship with Victoria oscillated between affection and tension, as he pushed against a maternal grip shaped by both love and dread. The turning point in Leopold's story came when he secured a measure of freedom by accepting a position as a royal advisor and participating in political life. His keen mind made him valuable, and he became known for his progressive views, especially on education and labor. Yet he remained aware that every achievement carried a shadow. While his siblings married into Europe's most powerful dynasties, Leopold's condition made negotiations delicate. Still, in 1882, he accomplished what many thought impossible. He married Princess Helen of Waldeck and Pyrmont, finding in her a partner who understood both his vulnerabilities and his determination to live fully despite them. Leopold's life, however, was tragically short. In 1884, while in Cannes, he slipped and fell, triggering a cerebral hemorrhage from which he could not recover. He died at only 30, His daughter, Princess Alice, was born months later, a child he would never meet, though she would one day become one of Europe's most influential royal figures. Leopold's death devastated Victoria, who mourned him with an intensity reserved for the son who had always felt closest to her heart. His life remains one of the most poignant in the royal family's history, a story of brilliance constrained by fragility, of courage forged in vulnerability, and of a young man who lived as bravely as his body allowed. Number 8. Princess Beatrice. Number 8 is Princess Beatrice, Queen Victoria's youngest child, born in 1857 and destined from her first breath to become her mother's constant companion. Beatrice entered the world after the deaths of several of her siblings' playmates and during the period when Victoria had sunk deeply into mourning for Prince Albert. In that atmosphere of grief, the infant Beatrice became a kind of emotional anchor for the Queen. Victoria adored her, clung to her, and very quickly decided that Beatrice's future would not resemble that of her brothers and sisters. Where they were expected to marry into European dynasties and build political alliances, Beatrice was expected to remain at home, a daughter bound by loyalty rather than diplomacy. Her childhood was defined by silence, routine, and the heavy presence of her mother's sorrow. While other royal children chafed against discipline, Beatrice internalized it. She grew into a gentle, dutiful young woman, whose calm demeanor soothed Victoria's volatile moods. The Queen referred to her as baby well into adulthood, refusing to acknowledge that Beatrice might harbor ambitions beyond the narrow role assigned to her. Her siblings moved away one by one. She remained a quiet figure moving through the vast, echoing spaces of Windsor and Osborne House, caring for a mother who saw in her the last link to a happier past. The turning point arrived when Beatrice fell in love with Prince Henry of Battenberg. For the first time, she asserted her own desires, and Victoria responded with fury. The Queen refused to permit the marriage unless Beatrice and her future husband agreed to live permanently with her. The condition was both controlling and revealing. Beatrice accepted it, choosing love but at the cost of independence. In 1885, the marriage took place, and Henry became not just Beatrice's husband, but effectively Victoria's resident son-in-law. The arrangement satisfied the Queen but placed immense pressure on the couple, who now balanced matrimonial intimacy with constant royal duty. Tragedy struck in 1896, when Henry joined the British expedition to Ashanti and contracted malaria. He died on the return journey, leaving Beatrice a widow at 38. The loss broke her heart, but deepened her bond with Victoria. For the remaining 5 years of the Queen's life, Beatrice became her closest confidant, her secretary, and the guardian of her private thoughts. After Victoria's death in 1901, Beatrice undertook the monumental task of editing and transcribing her mother's journals. Millions of words that shaped the historical image of the Queen. It was an act of devotion that simultaneously preserved and controlled Victoria's legacy. Beatrice lived until 1944, outlasting nearly all her siblings. She remained a quiet, steadfast presence within the royal family, a woman whose life was shaped less by the politics of Europe than by the emotional dominion of one powerful parent. Her legacy is that of loyalty carried to its furthest extent. A daughter who became custodian of an empire's memory while sacrificing much of her own freedom. Number 7. Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught and Streathern. Number 7 is Prince Arthur, Queen Victoria's third son, and the child who most closely embodied the disciplined, duty-bound ideal his parents valued. Born in 1850, Arthur arrived during a moment when the British Empire was expanding rapidly, and Victoria and Albert were determined to raise a generation of children who would strengthen the monarchy through service rather than scandal. From infancy, Arthur displayed a calm, measured temperament that contrasted sharply with the volatility of some of his siblings. He became the son Victoria trusted, the son who never provoked her temper, and the son who seemed naturally fitted to uphold the military traditions she admired. Arthur's childhood was shaped by Prince Albert's rigid educational system, early rising, precise study schedules, physical training, and moral instruction. Unlike his eldest brothers, who sometimes pushed against these demands, Arthur embraced them. When he attended the Royal Military College at Woolwich, he excelled, and by his late teens he had joined the British Army. His military career became the defining arc of his youth and early adulthood. He served in Canada, Egypt, Ireland, and India, earning genuine respect rather than honorary rank. Victoria, who feared losing her children to foreign courts, took comfort in Arthur's steady rise within the army. A loyal son serving the empire without leaving her emotional orbit. The turning point in Arthur's life came in 1911, when he was appointed Governor-General of Canada. Unlike his siblings who married into Europe's royal houses, Arthur became a symbol of the crown within the empire itself. His tenure in Canada was marked by formality, efficiency, and a strict sense of propriety. He traveled extensively, met Indigenous leaders, presided over state ceremonies, and strengthened Canada's connection to the monarchy at a time when national identity was rapidly shifting. While he lacked the charisma of later royal figures, he brought stability, and his presence represented continuity in a world inching toward war. When the First World War erupted, Arthur's skills and discipline placed him at the center of military administration. Though too old for frontline command, he served as an inspector and advisor, maintaining close ties with regiments he had once led. His sense of duty remained unshaken even when Europe's royal families, many connected by blood to Victoria, turned against one another in a conflict that shattered the old order. Arthur watched cousins, nephews, and brothers-in-law take opposing sides, a living reminder of how deeply Victoria's descendants were entangled in the war that consumed the 20th century's opening decades. Arthur died in 1942 at the age of 91, the longest lived of Victoria's sons. His legacy is one of discipline, loyalty, and restrained ambition. While the marriages and scandals of his siblings shaped European politics, Arthur's life demonstrated another route through the maze of royal expectation: steady service, controlled emotion, and unwavering commitment to the crown. He was, in many ways, the child Victoria most wished all her children could have been: dutiful without resentment, loyal without rebellion, and dedicated to the monarchy that defined his entire existence. Number 6. Princess Louise, Duchess of Argyll. Number 6 is Princess Louise, Queen Victoria's fourth daughter, and the child who most consistently challenged the rigid expectations of the British court. Born in 1848, she arrived during the height of Victoria and Albert's romantic partnership, at a time when the royal household operated under Albert's strict discipline and Victoria's emotional intensity. Unlike her more compliant siblings, Louise possessed a restless energy and an artistic temperament that set her apart from the moment she could speak. She was clever, outspoken, and unafraid to question authority, traits that both fascinated and unsettled her parents. As she grew older, Louise's intellectual curiosity and creative talent became impossible to ignore. She studied sculpture under professional artists, insisted on attending classes at the National Art Training School, and mingled with writers and thinkers far outside the usual royal circles. At a time when Victorian society expected princesses to be ornamental rather than expressive, Louise pursued art with seriousness and ambition. She sculpted public pieces, supported women's education, and participated in early movements for social reform. While Victoria admired her daughter's talent, she fretted over Louise's independence. The Queen preferred daughters who remained close, dutiful, and predictable. Louise was none of these things. The turning point in her life came in 1871, when she married John Campbell, Marquess of Lorne, the heir to the Dukedom of Argyll. It was a groundbreaking union, the first time since the 16th century that a daughter of a British monarch married a subject rather than a foreign prince. Victoria approved the match partly because it kept Louise in Britain, but the marriage brought its own complications. Louise and Lorne were mismatched in temperament. their relationship marked by long periods of separation, diverging interests, and quiet tensions that never fully resolved. Yet the union granted Louise a degree of personal freedom rarely experienced by her sisters, allowing her to travel, exhibit her art, and continue building the unconventional life she wanted. Louise's later years were shaped by a combination of public service, private sorrow, and persistent mystery. She supported hospitals, championed female nurses, and remained deeply involved in artistic institutions. But she also endured loneliness, fractures within the royal family, and the slow fading of a cultural world she had once fought to modernize. Rumors surrounded her. Speculation about romantic entanglements, political friendships, and the true nature of her marriage. Yet Louise carried herself with poise, refusing to allow public curiosity to rewrite her story. She lived until 1939, long enough to witness the collapse of monarchies across Europe and the emergence of a world far removed from the Victorian certainty of her youth. Her legacy is that of a boundary breaker, a princess who refused to exist solely as a symbol, who carved her own place in the arts, and who pushed gently but firmly against the constraints of her birth. In her life, we see the quiet rebellion of a woman determined to be more than the title she carried. A reminder that even within the strictest courts, individuality can find a way to persist. Number 5. Prince Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh and Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Number 5 is Prince Alfred, Queen Victoria's second son, born in 1844 and shaped from the beginning by pressures different from those placed on his elder brother, the future King Edward VII. While Bertie struggled under the suffocating expectations of heirship, Alfred was allowed a measure of freedom. But that freedom came with its own demands. Victoria and Albert saw in him the ideal candidate for a naval career, one that would project British power across the seas and reinforce the monarchy's connection to empire. Alfred embraced this path with determination, becoming the son who carried the Royal Navy's prestige on his shoulders. His childhood reflected this purpose. Quiet, disciplined, and dutiful, Alfred was neither rebellious nor emotionally volatile. He understood hierarchy instinctively and admired structure, traits that drew him naturally toward naval life. At 14, he joined the Royal Navy, beginning a career that took him across the world, to Australia, the Mediterranean, South Africa, and the coastlines of Europe and Asia. His voyages reinforced Britain's global influence, and wherever he went, colonial administrators, settlers, and local rulers were reminded of the Crown's reach. His progress pleased Victoria, who saw in Alfred the embodiment of the moral seriousness she associated with Prince Albert. The turning point in Alfred's story arrived in 1868, when he became the target of the first attempted assassination of a member of the British royal family. While visiting Sydney, he was shot at close range by an Irish nationalist named Henry James O'Farrell. The bullet struck Alfred in the back, and for several days, his survival was uncertain. News raced across the empire, and colonial governments organized mass demonstrations of loyalty in response. Alfred recovered, but the event revealed how deeply politics and empire could shape a royal life, even one spent largely on the deck of a ship. It was a reminder that the British monarchy was not merely ceremonial. It was a symbol contested, resented, and defended across continents. In 1874, Alfred married Grand Duchess Maria Alexandrovna of Russia, daughter of Tsar Alexander II. It was an alliance that linked the British monarchy with the Romanov dynasty at a moment when Europe stood on the brink of unpredictable change. The match, however, was not an easy one. Maria arrived in Britain with the hauteur of a Russian imperial princess, clashing with Victoria's court and causing friction among the royal family. Alfred, caught between his mother's expectations and his wife's ambitions, grew increasingly withdrawn. Their marriage produced children, but it never found a harmonious rhythm, and the couple spent long stretches living apart. Alfred's life changed again in 1893, when he succeeded his uncle as Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in Germany. The quiet naval officer became a ruling prince, navigating the complicated politics of a small German duchy while maintaining ties to Britain. Ties that would grow strained as Europe inched toward the First World War. He carried out his duties competently, but his later years were darkened by personal tragedy. Most painfully, the death of his only son, after a long struggle with illness and emotional turmoil. Alfred died in 1900 at the age of 55. His life stands as one of transition, between sea and land, between Britain and Germany, between quiet service and the burdens of dynastic responsibility. He was the son who did everything expected of him. Yet his legacy is tinged with melancholy, a reminder that even the most dutiful royal lives can be shaken by forces far beyond their control. Number 4. Prince Albert Edward, the future king, Edward VII. Number 4 is Prince Albert Edward, known to the family as Bertie, and to history as King Edward VII. Born in 1841 as Victoria and Albert's first son, he was destined from birth to carry the immense weight of the crown. Yet unlike his mother, who grew into authority with youthful conviction, or his father, whose disciplined mind shaped the Victorian era, Bertie struggled under expectations he could never fully satisfy. He was not academic, not contemplative, not the intellectual heir Albert wanted. From his earliest years, he was compared unfavorably to the ideal father and the formidable mother he could never replicate. Childhood for Bertie was a procession of tutors and lessons designed to mold him into a scholar king. Instead, those lessons revealed the central tension of his life. His mind worked differently, more attuned to people than to books. He was charming, observant, and socially gifted. But Victoria and Albert deemed these talents frivolous. The result was a child raised under constant disapproval, carrying the sting of parental disappointment that would haunt him well into adulthood. While his sisters formed warm relationships with their parents, Bertie became the focus of criticism. A boy taught to believe that everything he enjoyed was somehow wrong. The turning point came in 1861 during a brief military training exercise in Ireland, when Bertie engaged in a romantic encounter with an actress named Nellie Clifton. News reached Albert, who traveled to see his son, exhausted by years of tension and illness. Soon after returning home, Albert died. Victoria, shattered by grief, blamed Bertie for his father's death. Whether fair or not, that accusation shaped their relationship for decades. Bertie became heir to the throne, but was effectively shut out of government affairs, while Victoria, consumed by mourning, left him wandering the edges of royal responsibility with little guidance. Unable to serve politically, he became the center of London's social world, a prince who charmed aristocrats, diplomats, and artists with a grace that contrasted sharply with his stern upbringing. In 1863, he married Princess Alexandra of Denmark, a beautiful and beloved royal figure whose warmth softened his public image, but did little to resolve the private wounds left by his parents. Their marriage produced children and a durable companionship, but Bertie's frustrations and long exclusion from power led him into extramarital affairs that became the whispered scandals of his era. Yet beneath the gossip was a deeper truth. Bertie excelled in the role Victoria refused him. He understood diplomacy instinctively, forging relationships with European leaders, easing tensions at court, and becoming an early architect of the soft power that would later define modern monarchy. When Victoria died in 1901, Bertie finally became King Edward VII. After waiting nearly 60 years, he entered the role with ease and confidence. His reign was brief, only 9 years, but influential. He strengthened alliances, modernized the monarchy, and helped stabilize Europe during a period of rising tensions. His charm, once dismissed as weakness, became a diplomatic asset. His intuitive understanding of human behavior, so unlike his father's academic precision, proved invaluable in guiding Britain through the dawn of the 20th century. Edward VII died in 1910. His life captures the emotional cost of royal expectation. A child underestimated, a young man blamed, an heir sidelined, and a king who, despite everything, managed to shape the course of his nation. His legacy is the transformation of the monarchy from rigid institution into a diplomatic force, a shift that would define the modern royal family sung after his death. Number 3. Princess Helena. Number 3 is Princess Helena, Queen Victoria's fifth child and the daughter who spent her life balancing fierce loyalty to her mother with a quiet determination to carve a small, personal space within the vast machinery of empire. Born in 1846, Helena entered the royal household during its most orderly years, when Prince Albert's influence reached its peak and the family operated under strict routines. She was neither rebellious like Louise nor politically central like Vicky, but she possessed a steadiness that made her invaluable to Victoria. From her earliest years, she became a helper, a comforter, and a reliable presence within a court often shaken by illness, quarrels, and shifting alliances. As Helena grew, her practical nature deepened. She was not destined for dramatic political marriages like her elder sisters, nor did she show artistic ambitions like Louise. Instead, she nurtured interests that were quietly radical for a Victorian princess: nursing, needlework, women's welfare, and the expanding world of medical professionalism. She trained informally in first aid and surgical care, corresponded with pioneers of nursing, and championed the emerging profession long before such work was considered suitable for royalty. Victoria valued her daughter's domestic dependability, and Helena often found herself drawn into the intimate operations of the Queen's household, organizing correspondence, managing charities, and supporting her mother through grief and governance. The turning point in Helena's life came with her marriage to Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein in 1866. Compared to her sister's politically strategic unions, Helena's marriage seemed modest, even provincial. But it contained a crucial condition that revealed Victoria's intentions. Helena was to remain close to the Queen in Britain. The marriage moved forward, but Helena never truly left Victoria's orbit. She and Christian settled at Frogmore House near Windsor, where their home became an extension of the Queen's domestic world. From this base, Helena expanded her charitable work, becoming a founding member of the British Red Cross and the Royal School of Needlework, and supporting hospitals, women's education, and medical reform. Helena's later years were marked by persistence rather than spectacle. She traveled widely within the United Kingdom, presided over organizations with diligence and seriousness, and became an advocate for nurses during a period when their labor was undervalued and their moral character scrutinized. In her public speeches, she stressed discipline, professional training, and the dignity of caregiving, values shaped by her own upbringing under Albert's system and Victoria's emotional demands. Privately, Helena endured the slow unraveling of Europe's royal connections, watching her siblings' dynasties collide during the First World War. She remained loyal to the crown at a time when loyalty itself was being redefined. Princess Helena died in 1923, the longest-lived of Victoria's daughters at the time of her passing. She left no sweeping political legacy, no dramatic scandal, and no throne passed to descendants. Instead, her mark endures in the quiet foundations of modern nursing and women's professional work, in the charities she guided and the institutions she helped professionalize. She was the daughter who stayed, not out of weakness, but out of conviction. In a family defined by empire and ambition, Helena represented steadiness, service, and the uncelebrated labor that holds institutions together from within. Number 2. Princess Alice, Grand Duchess of Hesse and by Rhine. Number 2 is Princess Alice, Queen Victoria's third child, and the daughter whose life combined compassion, tragedy, and quiet heroism more profoundly than any of her siblings. Born in 1843, she arrived during the early, optimistic years of Victoria and Albert's marriage, when the royal household felt orderly and united. Among all the children, Alice was the one who most resembled Prince Albert in temperament: thoughtful, empathetic, intellectually curious, and instinctively selfless. She became her father's comfort during his long struggles with overwork and depression, and she became her mother's emotional anchor after his death. From childhood onward, Alice carried the weight of other people's suffering with an intensity that shaped every stage of her life. Her youth was marked by responsibilities far beyond her years. When Prince Albert fell gravely ill in 1861, it was Alice who nursed him with tireless devotion. She remained by his bedside in his final hours, comforting Victoria and managing the smallest details of the household while the rest of the nation mourned. At just 18, Alice had become the emotional caretaker of the monarchy. In the months following Albert's death, Victoria fell into despair, isolating herself from public life and relying almost entirely on Alice for survival. Their bond deepened, but it was a bond forged through grief rather than joy, one that demanded patience and sacrifice from a daughter who longed for independence. The turning point came in 1862 when Alice married Prince Louis of Hesse. Unlike the grand dynastic marriages of some siblings, Alice's union drew her into a small German principality, where her intelligence and humanitarian instincts found room to flourish. As Grand Duchess, she championed hospitals, nursing reform, female education, and welfare for the poor. Influenced by Florence Nightingale and the medical tragedies she had witnessed in her own family, Alice modernized healthcare in Hesse with remarkable energy. She visited the sick, tended to wounded soldiers during the Austro-Prussian War, and worked closely with nurses in conditions that shocked the rigid sensibilities of European courts. Her compassion was not ceremonial. It was hands-on, fearless, and deeply personal. But the life she built was shadowed by hardship. Alice bore 7 children and endured multiple family crises, including the death of her young son Friedrich, known as Friddy, who suffered from hemophilia, the same condition that afflicted many of Victoria's descendants. His fall from a window and subsequent death devastated her, reopening the wound left by Albert's passing. Her letters reveal a woman torn between public responsibility and private anguish, struggling to carry grief while continuing the work she believed in so fiercely. The blow that defined her final years came in 1878, when diphtheria swept through her household. One child after another fell ill, and Alice cared for them with the same devotion she had once given her father. When her daughter Marie succumbed to the disease, Alice tried to hold the family together, but in her determination to comfort her surviving children, she contracted diphtheria herself. On December 14, 1878, the anniversary of Prince Albert's death, Alice died at 35. The symmetry of the date was not lost on Victoria, who mourned her beloved daughter with a depth that rivaled her grief for Albert. Princess Alice left a legacy woven through both philanthropy and lineage. Her descendants included Empress Alexandra Feodorovna of Russia, whose fate in 1918 would become one of the most tragic royal stories of the century. Through Alice, the Victorian world flowed directly into the upheavals of the modern age. Her life was brief but luminous, defined not by crowns, but by compassion, a reminder that within the rigid world of royalty, humanity can still shine through. Number 1. Victoria, Princess Royal, German Empress and Queen of Prussia. Number 1 is Victoria, Princess Royal, Queen Victoria's firstborn child, the daughter who carried the brightest hopes of her parents and whose fate became bound to the rise and fall of empires. Born in 1840, she arrived at a moment when Victoria and Albert were still young, idealistic, and determined to reshape the monarchy into a moral force for Europe. From infancy, the Princess Royal, known in the family as Vicky, was groomed not merely as a daughter of Britain, but as a future leader in the shaping of European politics. Albert oversaw her education personally, instilling in her the intellectual rigor, liberal ideals, and political insight that he hoped would someday guide the continent. Vicky exceeded every expectation. She learned languages quickly, studied philosophy and constitutional law, and absorbed the spirit of reform at the heart of the prince consort's worldview. She was quick-witted and exceptionally articulate, a child whose brilliance outpaced her siblings and whose character most closely reflected Albert's hopes for a more enlightened monarchy. Victoria adored her, though sometimes uneasily. She recognized in Vicky a strength and ambition that could not be contained within the narrow domestic ideals of mid-Victorian womanhood. The turning point in Vicky's life came at 17, when she married Prince Friedrich Wilhelm of Prussia. The union was celebrated across Europe as a symbol of peace, binding Britain to the rising power of Prussia. Yet the marriage drew her into a political world far harsher than any she had known. The Prussian court, dominated by militarists, conservatives, and a suspicion of foreign influence, viewed her liberal English ideas with disdain. She and her husband, the future Emperor Frederick III, shared a vision of constitutional reform. But they faced constant resistance from the Prussian establishment and, most fatefully, from her son, the future Kaiser Wilhelm II. When Frederick finally became emperor in 1888, he was already dying of throat cancer. His reign lasted only 99 days. In that brief moment, Vicky glimpsed the future she and Albert had imagined, a Germany led by a liberal, constitutional monarch. But when Frederick died, the dream died with him. Wilhelm II ascended the throne, rejecting his parents' ideals and steering Germany onto a path of aggression and instability that would eventually contribute to the First World War. The rift between mother and son became one of the most painful chapters in Vicky's life, a tragedy not only personal but historical. Vicky spent her widowhood in uneasy isolation at Friedrichshof, the home she built in memory of her husband. She continued writing, corresponding, and advocating for the constitutional principles she believed in. But her influence waned as Wilhelm tightened control. Her letters reveal a woman watching her son undo everything she had worked for, a mother witnessing the descent of Europe into alliances and tensions she feared would spiral into catastrophe. Her predictions were chillingly accurate. She died in 1901, only months after Queen Victoria. Her legacy, however, stretched far beyond the politics of her unhappy later years. Vicky's children and grandchildren would occupy thrones across Europe, linking the British crown to the German, Russian, Romanian, and Greek dynasties. Through her, the Victorian world flowed into the turbulent 20th century. She remains the most consequential of Victoria's children, a tragic visionary whose intelligence and ideals were ahead of her time, and whose life demonstrated how the fate of a single royal daughter could shape the destiny of nations. The story of Queen Victoria's 9 children is not merely a royal genealogy. It is the hidden map of Europe's destiny. Through these 9 lives, we see the empire not as a symbol, but as a family. Fragile, ambitious, wounded, and entangled in the shifting forces of a century on the brink of transformation. Each child carried a different fragment of Victoria and Albert's hopes. Some fulfilled those hopes with discipline and devotion. Others rebelled against the weight of expectation, and some were shaped more by sorrow than by privilege. Together, they became the architects of Europe's royal network, their marriages weaving alliances that bound nations into a vast web of shared bloodlines. But those same alliances pulled the continent into its darkest hours. The sons raised in military tradition and the daughters married into foreign courts would watch their descendants take opposing sides in the First World War, tearing through the very fabric their parents had been meant to preserve. In this way, the family that once symbolized unity became a mirror of Europe's fracturing world. Yet beneath the history books lies the more intimate truth. Victoria's children lived under the shadow of a mother who loved fiercely and controlled relentlessly. A woman who never fully recovered from loss and whose grief shaped the emotional landscape of her household. Some children became extensions of that grief. Others escaped it only to build lives marked by their own tragedies. And a few, like Vicky and Alice, carried ideals too large for the courts that tried to contain them. Their stories remind us that monarchy, for all its ceremony, is built from the same fragile materials as any family. Love, fear, ambition, disappointment, and the endless search for identity. The 9 children of Queen Victoria were born into palaces, but they inherited a burden no crown could ease. The expectation to uphold an empire while navigating the private storms of their own lives. In the end, their legacies stretch far beyond the Victorian era. Through them, we see the rise and fall of dynasties, the seeds of global conflict, the evolution of modern monarchy, and the enduring complexity of a family placed at the center of the world stage. Their lives form a single, sweeping narrative, one that moves from triumph to tragedy, from personal struggle to geopolitical consequence. And together, they reveal the true human cost of ruling an empire.